Hello and welcome to GameSack. Analogue has a new console out, so it's time to give it a look over. This time it's the Analogue Duo. It clocks in at $250 and plays games for the TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, and Duo line of consoles. Yes, that means even CD games, and no, you don't need to bring your own system card. So, let's get started. The Analogue Duo comes inside of a box. This should surprise no one. You can get it in black or white. I chose black because I wanted every single piece of dust possible to show up on camera. Inside the box is the Analogue Duo console itself, an HDMI cable, a USB cable for the power adapter, an Analogue logo sticker, and the console's instruction manual. By the way, be sure to use the included cable and power adapter or you might get some undesirable results. All USB-C stuff isn't equal. Analogue also sent me not one, but two wireless 8-bit DO controllers, a USB cable for charging said controllers, and a 32GB SD card. The console itself bears a striking resemblance to the real Turbo Duo, only smaller. It doesn't look out of place sitting next to the TurboGrafx 16 Mini released a couple of years back. On the front of the unit, you have slots for card and CD games. The cards slide in pretty far and snap into place. The grip is fairly tight. Yes, that's what she said. You can't insert this adapter to play Japanese games at all. That's okay though, because the console can play Japanese games without an adapter. It can even plug in thick cards like this Tennokoi Banku. Unfortunately, the Turbo EverDrive Pro is too thick to fit in the slot. Couldn't they have just made this a little bigger? However, if you remove the lid on the card, it'll fit in fine. You can insert a CD, but it doesn't automatically power on the console when you do. When powered on, the disc slides in pretty far, then it's grabbed and spun up. When ejecting the disc, it spits it out just far enough to grab and pull out. On the side of the unit, you can plug in your real PC Engine controllers and peripherals. You also have a headphone jack and a volume control. Yeah, on the side, because who doesn't miss cables jutting out of the side of the Duo? Oh, NEC, why did you make this a thing? On the back, you have the inlet for your power, and then you have two USB ports for controllers or whatever, the HDMI port and the slot for the SD card. On the right side, you get nothing. Underneath is a giant rubber foot. This thing ain't gonna be sliding around. The 8-bit DO controller feels a touch small in my hands, but otherwise is very comfortable. The D-pad and the buttons are the same size as the real controllers. The top two buttons are rapid-fire versions for the regular bottom buttons. There is also a home button on this one. They last between 17 and 18 hours on a single charge. Once you get everything connected and powered up, you're greeted by what they call a tutorial, which goes over some basic stuff and how you can deal with it. You also get to set the date and time. The menu itself is almost exactly like the one in the Analogue Pocket portable system, and it works the same way. There are various settings for you to adjust, and they all stick. No need to save everything like previous console OSs from Analogue. You've got all the basic stuff, and I'm not going to go over everything here in detail as it's pretty self-explanatory. But later I'll definitely talk about the things which deserve a mention, which are unique to the Duo. You can insert a cue card or CD while the menu is up, and it'll recognize the game. Sadly, the font is so big that the entire game's name often can't fit on screen. Press the 1 button and it takes you to a splash screen for that game with a little information. Press the button again and you're into the gameplay. And usually the games work pretty well. Even some homebrew games like FX Unit Yuki and Mysterious Song are officially recognized here. Other homebrew games like this one won't run at all no matter what. Some games, like the English version of Ys 4, are not recognized and it just has a play CD prompt instead. Cosmic Fantasy 2 from Working Designs also isn't recognized. Moreover, the game thinks that it has corrupt save files that it needs to erase before it can begin. You have to erase them, but once you make a new save, then you can play as normal. Some cue cards I tried weren't recognized and only launched to a black screen no matter how many times I tried to get them to work. Weirdly, each and every one of these games worked perfectly fine the next day, except Shinobi. This one gets recognized but refuses to run, even after I thoroughly cleaned it. It runs just fine in my SuperGrafx, so I don't know. It also works fine here on the Duo if you run it from an EverDrive, so again, I don't know. Speaking of the SuperGrafx, the Duo here will run those games automatically as well. And naturally, you can run CD games and they'll play just like you'd expect in most cases. When playing a game, holding the select button and pressing down will bring up the Duo's menu so you can quit the game, adjust some of the settings, and so on. Be warned though that this doesn't pause your game and it'll keep running in the background. If you want to capture a screenshot of the game you're playing, hold down the Home button and tap Start. This only works if you're using the 8-bit Do controllers. No screenshots for you if you're using a real PC Engine or Turbo Duo controller. You don't deserve it. There's supposedly a save state feature that you can toggle, but it doesn't seem to work. Every game I tried says save not supported. I have to assume that this will be a feature in an upcoming firmware. And of course, games that utilize 6 buttons like Street Fighter II Champion Edition play fine. Though if you want to play them in 6-button mode, you'll have to use a wired 6-button controller since the 8-bit Do controller only has 2 buttons. You'll need an SD card to save your games, and each game that uses a backup save function gets its own dedicated save space. Even Hue cards that have a backup RAM function take advantage of this. Basically, game save storage should never be a problem. Games that aren't recognized seem to just get assigned a generic number on the SD card, but they'll load up the next time you play the game. The Tenokoe Banku runs, but it doesn't function as the Analogue Duo's memory is stored differently. Basically here, it can only transfer its contents with itself. Unlike the previous consoles from Analogue, the menu here has no option to adjust the color of the LED. What the hell? I need the LED to change colors. What am I gonna do now? Just play video games instead? I don't think so! One thing I really like about the menu is the library option. This shows you a list of all the games you've played on the Duo, a snapshot of the title screen, and the amount of time you spent with each title. It's a nice touch, and I love little stats like this. So the menu aesthetics are kind of basic, too large, and overall a bit disappointing, but it gets the job done. Now let's take a look at how the Duo plays games as well as the features it includes. Most games play fine and control well with either a real controller or the 8-bit Do one. There are no special options like reducing sprite flicker. The HDMI features a 1080p output, but it can also do 720p and 480p. Also at this time, the Analog DAC or DAC does not work with the Analogue Duo. The options for things here are pretty basic compared to the previous consoles, though they fall in line with the Pocket. There are some scanline effects you can enable here, like the CRT Trinitron. You can adjust various aspects of this to make it look a bit more to your liking. There's also the Turbo Express mode, which is supposed to mimic the screen of that. I don't know, I've never had a Turbo Express. What do you think? Lastly, there's the PC Engine LT, which had its own screen, which this mode is supposed to imitate. I've never seen one of those in real life, but I guess it looks like this. These last two modes also add a slight bit of motion blurring. None of these modes adjust the overall brightness to compensate. There's a Show Overscan option that you can turn on, and this will shrink the image to fit on the screen. In some games, like Bonk here, it actually crops out part of the game's graphics. Not any which matter, mind you. A good example of where you'd want this option off is in Splatterhouse. Notice the green bars on the side and the repeating borders on the top and bottom. All of this is hidden with this option off, and it's the preferred way to play. There are several other games where this will come in handy as well. Another interesting and very cool option is the color palette selection. You have two choices, composite or RGB. RGB is just like what you'd get if you were using an RGB solution for your real Turbo or PC Engine console. And composite is more like the natural colors that were intended by the developer. This is most noticeable in games like Startling Odyssey 2 and the battle screens, which have the blue sky gradient. Change the color to composite and it looks more like it does when using composite video. You get the intended colors and keep the RGB clarity. Another great example of where this helps is in Bonk's Adventure. He's just way too red in RGB mode, but in composite mode, he looks as he should. I personally just recommend putting it on composite and leaving it there forever. CD games will automatically select a system card that they need to use. However, you can force a specific system card if you want. Arcade card CDs play just fine. Mostly. Ryoko no Ken or Art of Fighting, which is an arcade card game, has an issue. When played on a real console, the resolution switches in order to mimic the scaling of the arcade game. A lot of people find this pretty jarring. But when you play it on the Duo, 3 or 4 black frames are inserted during the resolution switch. This makes it even more distracting to play. Basically, the Duo can't switch resolutions fast enough for this game. As for regular CDs, Juoki, also known as Altered Beast, isn't fully functional. This game requires the System 1.0 card, or it will lock up shortly after you turn into a beast. This is the only game in the entire library with this issue. However, if you insert a system card, the Duo will use it instead of its own. So if you happen to have a real System 1.0 card, then you're good.
Welcome to your doom.
I'm surprised you haven't taken some interest in this case, Holmes.
Full motion video games like Sherlock Holmes 1 and 2 run, but they get out of sync on longer video segments. Usually it's okay, but if the video is too long, it'll freeze and then eventually loop. Not that these games had perfect sync on real hardware, because they didn't, but the sync didn't drift so far.
They, too, will be extremely useful in our work.
Analogue says that they're working on it.
Oh, what ghastly business.
Other games with full motion video, however, perform as they should, no matter how long the clips are.
John Madden Football for the Turbo Duo.
Burned CDRs seem to work fine on the machine.
I'm sorry, I know it's early, but I heard that Adol and Dogi were back.
Music CDs are not supported, unfortunately. If you insert something that it doesn't like, you may have a difficult time ejecting the disc. If that happens, you can put a blank text file on the root of the SD card labeled duo_eject.txt, and the Duo will try to eject anything that may be in the slot when you first power it on. As I said before, the Turbo EverDrive Pro fits and works if you remove its shield. The Analogue Duo will have no clue what game you're playing, and it won't be added to the library screen. CD games will not work if you've previously played any real CD or Hue card since the console has been powered on. The Turbo EverDrive Pro must be the first thing you play after powering up, and then CD games will run fine. However, you'll notice that there's no CD audio. In the analog menu, just go all the way to the audio settings and make sure the Hue card audio is turned on. In the Turbo EverDrive Pro's audio options, you'll want to set the left volume to 85% and the right side to 97% for the proper left-right balance. After all that, it sounds pretty damn good. However, keep in mind that the Turbo EverDrive Pro's save state functions don't work, or at least work well here. It's pretty glitchy at best. Sometimes when playing real CDs, I can get long load times or it just gives up altogether. This was most noticeable in East Book 1 and 2, which is one of my most played games, but the disc isn't in too bad a shape. Often rebooting the game or the console will fix the issue. The TurboGrafx audio quality is mostly pretty good, but I did notice some minor discrepancies. For example, here in Legendary Axe, listen to the dude land on the ground after a jump here on the Duo. Now here's how that sounds on real hardware. It's not a huge issue, but I figured I'd point it out anyway because, hey, that's what I do. The audio from real discs mostly sounds fantastic, though occasionally there will be a slight blip that lasts barely a fraction of a second. Take a listen, can you hear these examples?
Why have you come to the world of reality?
It'll blip in the same place each time, which means it's likely the disc itself.
Why have you come to the world of reality?
However, there's no issue with this very same disc on real hardware. Check it out.
Why have you come to the world of reality?
I'm guessing that maybe they need better error correction reading CD audio? I don't know. The biggest concern I have, though, is when using a real wired controller with a controller port, specifically when using the built-in turbo switches. They don't respond in the same way as they do on real hardware. For example, here in Shadow of the Beast, I usually have the switch all the way up to punch really fast. But here, he acts as if I'm just holding the button down without any rapid fire on. So I put the switch into the middle position, which gives me rapid fire, but it's much faster than the middle position on a real console. However, several minutes later, after going through a few different screens, this behavior changed. Now I couldn't punch at all with the switch in the middle position, despite having played the previous 10 minutes with it that way just fine. I had to switch it to the top and fastest position to get any rapid fire at all. And if you recall, that position didn't work in this same game a few minutes ago. This same controller doesn't exhibit this behavior on my SuperGrafx. Games like R-Type also suffer from this, where it's fine in one stage, but by the time you get to stage 3, it completely changes and you have to move the switch's position. Hell, some games like Exile 2 here can suffer from this without needing to change screens. Suddenly, your weapon just stops working as you try to fumble with the switches and not die in the game at the same time. But then I enabled the pass-through mode in the input menu. This says that it's for special controllers. With it turned on, the turbo switches worked exactly like they should. But this disables the in-game menu, which might not be a big deal. It certainly isn't to me. What is a big deal though is that this pass-through mode needs to be enabled each and every time you power on the Duo if you're using a wired controller. There's currently no option to keep it on. This is all still very early firmware, in fact it's 1.0, so we'll see what happens after a while. The 8-bit DOE controller's rapid-fire buttons do not have this issue as their speed isn't adjustable. Overall, I do think the unit is pretty damn good even though it currently has its shortcomings. I'm glad that they made the audio compatible with the Turbo EverDrive Pro and added the option for composite colors. I do wish the HuCard slot was thicker so I didn't have to take apart the EverDrive though. I am glad to see the platform getting some more love though, as most people just care about Nintendo and just aren't versed in other consoles. Y'all are missing out on some really fun games. And there you go, the Analogue Duo. Like I said, overall, I think it's great. The games look and sound as they should, they play as they should, the core is fantastic. There are no real glitches other than me not being able to get my Shinobi HuCard to run for whatever reason, and also that whole rapid fire thing with the real controllers wired into the system that I talked about. But, you know, the real hardware for the TurboGrafx, Turbo Duo, all that stuff is getting very expensive, very tough to maintain, so this is a viable solution if you already have a library of games for the thing, but I suggest you just get an EverDrive and just have all the games. Or just emulate everything, that's fine too. Anyway, what do you guys think of the Analogue Duo? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Oh, that was a cool sound. Gonna listen to it again. My mistake. That wasn't the game sound effects. It just turns out it was me.